first. You know, there's a text in the Torah, in Leviticus, that says, that has always been the quintessential anti-LGBTQ text, that a man should not lie with a man as a woman. And so the text is there. However, the Jewish community my Jewish community, came out very clearly against the amendment without question, which means that we are supporting the LGBTQ community when it was on the ballot. You had to vote no in order to not put the anti-gay marriage into law. So we very clear, very, very, very clear. I just on Saturday night performed a wedding between two men who've been together for 25 years. And I believe love makes a family. I don't believe that God makes mistakes. I just don't. And so...
so what do you do with that line in the Bible, which you believe
so this is my favorite interpretation of it, and this is how I wrestle with it. A rabbi once said, it says, you don't lie with a man as a woman, which means that if you are in a gay relationship, you don't treat the man like a woman. Because that's disrespectful. And I love that. That totally gets me out of any concern. That answers the question, doesn't it? Yeah. You don't treat somebody, sometimes in gay relationships long ago, maybe not anymore as much, there was always the femme and the butch. There was always the man and the woman, you know? And that's what that was speaking to, not... In other
words, the two partners should be themselves rather than...
They should be themselves.
They shouldn't play some kind of a role.
You wouldn't.
And of course, we're used to, as Christians, we're used to reading that text as saying that in the actual act of sex, somebody who's doing the more male thing and somebody who's doing the more female thing, being the quote-unquote female is inferior. And we're so used to hearing that interpretation that we are unwilling to read the text with new eyes.
Right. So that helps me. And I would say that my congregation, especially the largest congregation in the state of Minnesota, probably 10-state region, all without a question support LGBTQ, the marriage of gay and lesbian people, transgender. You know, I have not had one person upset by that. As even politically right-wing as some might be because of the state of Israel, which is a whole other reality, nobody complained about that. There was a 90-year-old man who was being blessed for his birthday, and we did our first blessing. This was in 2001. We did our first blessing of a gay couple, and so I called him because I didn't know how he was going to feel, and he was like, "Rabbi, no problem, I'm honored. Don't worry about it." Really amazing. So that's kind of the community I feel blessed to be in.
I'm going to speak of it specifically from the point of view of Catholic tradition. There's been a teaching in Catholic tradition for a long time, goes back to the 12th century, late 12th century, late 1100s in the University of Paris, Thomas Aquinas, people like that. And what it says, there's natural law. And natural law is that God's trying to tell us something about what's right and wrong. And natural law says, if you just take the physical aspects of sex, and in terms of the role of the man and the role of the woman, that's the way it's supposed to be. Just look at the physical realities of how they get together. And that's the way it's supposed to be. That's called natural law. And that really has dominated Christian thinking, certainly Catholic thinking, and since then. And you could also say that marriage up until about somewhere in the first 20 years or so of the last century, the 20th century, people weren't married much more than 25 years or 30 years, and they lived horrible lives of drudgery and work. The whole idea of romance and love was not a very big thing. It was survival. You had kids, you got kids in order to do work for you if you're on the farm, and you died. And so there wasn't a lot, there's not a whole lot about relationship going on. It wasn't until the 20th century, the last century, that all of a sudden, you know, modernity, convenience, industrial revolution, allowed people to live longer, and it allowed people to develop relationships much more deeply. And it really called the question about relationship. And in the Catholic teaching, it called the question about, okay, well, what is this sexuality all about anyway? And so I grew up in a church that said it's about two things. It's about procreation, bringing children into the world and raising them. And secondly, it's about what they call the mutual love and fulfillment of the couple. It was those two things. But in the early teaching I grew up with, they were layered. The most important was the procreation part of it. You're expected to have children. And by the way, you could not prevent it. That's the birth control controversy. You couldn't prevent it. You sort of had to be open to however many kids you had. I grew up on a block in St. Paul. We had 6 kids in our family. They thought my parents were taking birth control because there were 9 over there, 10 over there, and you know, so that's how they thought of it. So in our church back in 1965, there was a radical reworking of the teaching, really radical, and in the sense that that whole thing about procreation and the mutual love and fulfillment. So the relationship thing started to get equal billing. 1965, the end of the Vatican Council. This might not sound like it's answering the question, but I think what's important in this development is the whole concept of the relational part of what it means to be human. And there was an enduring, and still is, a very enduring tradition in our Catholic Church that the relationship between these two people, and most the covenanted part of it, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, was to mirror God's relationship with us. So that's your taste of it on earth. That if you are fortunate enough to be a child of a relationship that makes that commitment and keeps it, you're blessed with a mirror of how God feels about you. That all just sort of developed. So the relationship takes more precedence. Then it gets called by what relationship? You know, who can make this commitment? Is it all, pardon me, this is my derogatory way of speaking about it, but is it all about the plumbing? You know, who's got what plumbing and what goes where and all that? Or is it about two people making a covenanted relationship? I take you for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death. It's an ideal, but that's the mirror. That calls the question about, well, who can have this relationship? If it's about children, 2 gay people can have children. And there seems to be some science that says they can do it as well or better maybe than others. I mean, so that's really not the question. The question is, can people of the same sex make that commitment for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health until death? And does that mirror for us God's relationship with us? That's the progression. And so where are we now in the Catholic Church? One statement, one little sentence, uttered last July on an airplane from Buenos Aires to Rome, with the press on the airplane and Pope Francis standing there, and somebody said, "What do you think about homosexuality?" He said, am I to judge?
My question is, am I still a Christian?
Yeah. It's not important. It is not ultimately important. Ultimately important whether I'm Christian, Jewish, is Muslim, or Hindu. It is not ultimately important. I don't know if that's embedded in that question. What is important, I think, what is ultimately important, is that we feel a connection, a real connection with a creator, the source of all being. And there are pathways to that belief. And there is a certain, there's a certain litmus test, if you will, to the legitimacy of that pathway. Now I'm getting judgmental, but why not? There's a certain litmus test to the legitimacy of that pathway. Is it known by compassion, love, mercy, justice, and forgiveness? You know, is that pathway notably known by that? I would say, yeah, you're definitely connected with a Christian tradition, even though you don't salute it necessarily, and your family traditions of holiday reinforce it.
So it's interesting. Underlying that question for me is, you know, why should somebody connect with a tradition, with a church, with a synagogue, with a mosque? What did they give you if I'm a good person, right? And I think I hear that a lot. And I guess for me, I just don't believe that human beings to our core, when confronted with something that needs our total selflessness, have a consistent ability to do so. I just don't think we do. I think we have selfishness in us. We can call it being, you know, I can figure out that I'm a good person. I give charity. I take care of, you know, the world. Yeah, until it's during the playoffs of your hockey team, and all of a sudden, church or synagogue, not so important, or doing something else. Then all of a sudden that becomes really number one, right? And the school spirit for it. And I'm like, is it really? So for me, I think every tradition gives thousands of years of struggling with those basic issues that I don't think individual people or even individual families can adequately, consistently struggle with in the way that tradition has for thousands of years. Now, we've made a lot of mistakes in doing it in the thousands of years, but in community, I think we make much better decisions than we do individually. So that's why I think, you know, whether you go to church or synagogue or whatever it is, call yourself whatever you want, I think it's really in the action. So in Judaism, we say deed that leads to creed. We do in order to believe. We don't have to take out our belief statement. We don't have to always say we have this, but we have to act accordingly, and that is the struggle between our good inclination and our evil inclination. Everyone has the possibility of being angelic, and everybody has the possibility, every single person has the possibility of being evil. That, if we know that about ourselves, then we can struggle with it and find the right act, behavior that we need in the moment. You know, for me, I really believe that it goes back to that evil, good people. I don't believe it's God that does it. I don't believe in a God that says you're going to have cancer and you're going to have a horrible disease and you're going to have this. The idea that God doesn't give you more than you can handle is something that I cannot stand. It is not my belief. It is the farthest thing from my belief. I don't believe in a God like that. I believe in a God who can help us through the things that happen. I think when bad things happen to good people, it's not that God's teaching them a lesson. It's that bad things happen. And guess what? Bad things happen because of our actions. Because we pollute the world. That's why there's a proliferation of cancer. It's because we do the things. So it's not about God. It's about human beings. I don't believe God in any way was a part of the Nazi regime to kill 6 million people. I do not believe it. I think it was Hitler. I think it was, it was people. That's my belief.
I'm going to go back to the word I mentioned a while back in terms of Advent, Emmanuel. God is with us. Because for me, it says it all. I think about, when we're really, really young, little kids, and the storm comes along, and it's frightening. The thing that helps us is that usually one of our parents will come and even get in bed with us or invite us to get in bed with them and say, "It'll be okay. I'm with you." If a disease, life-threatening disease comes into your family and it's horrible and everybody's afraid and sad, one of the most healing parts of it is if we can be together. If we can be there together. If it's not so frightening that we run from it, that we embrace one another. We cry with each other and we love each other, but we're with each other. So my understanding is that the Creator, in some mysterious way, don't ask me how all this happens, but basically did the creation. And not all of it goes right. A lot of it goes wrong. You can do all the human stuff about greed and selfishness and everything like that. That we do that, and we screw up the environment and all that. But what about tornadoes that wipe out towns and disease and all? I believe that the Creator, to some degree, is helpless with how this creation can go awry. What's salvific, what's saving, what's hopeful is that Creator is with us. That's the Christian story in the sense of, the special chosen one of God, Jesus, basically went to the depths of human suffering, meaning shame and pain, and worry and anxiety and abandonment and all of that. And the message is, I'm with you. Okay? I'm with you. And so I don't believe the Creator wills this stuff, In fact, if I did believe that, I'm an atheist.
That's a good way to end.